In 1943, right in the middle of the World War II, when Birkenau and Auschwitz, the crematoriums, were burning up and killing Jews by the thousands, literally 16 to 20,000 people a day. So Churchill and Roosevelt issue an official statement warning against the continuation of the genocide. They told Hitler to stop with the camps. And as we all know, nothing was happening. There was no progress. It went on absolutely deaf ears. Roosevelt, Kebiyochel, reiterated it a year later in the March of 1944. But still, nothing stopped. On the contrary, the numbers just became just increased as time went on. The killing continued, as they say, undeterred, briskly, without any type of hesitations. Now let me tell you something that needs to be known. The Allied forces knew about Auschwitz, they knew about Birkenau, and they definitely could have bombed it easily had they wanted to. One bomb on the railroad tracks would have stopped trains until they rebuilt it, which they had no time for, especially in 1944 when they were losing the war and they barely had time to be able to start rebuilding trains and tracks and everything on the process. If they would have blew it up with one simple bomb, it would have literally saved hundreds of thousands of Jews getting gassed and being burned in the crematoriums very easily. The excuse that Roosevelt Yimach Shemo would say is that they had no evidence of what was going on in Birkenau. They said the planes can't reach there. It's too out of our touch. It's in an unusual place that's far off. That's not part of our maslul, of our agenda of where we're meant to get to. We can't afford the bombs. We don't even know exactly where it's located, and therefore it's something that is not presently on our agenda to take care of it. Guess what? After the war, there were tens of pictures, I have a couple over here in front of me, of how at Birkenau, the extermination camp, what looked like actual pictures that were taken by, lo and behold, the planes of America that flew over the camp itself. When they were flying over, they took aerial pictures of the camp in detail. You're able to see the transport trains. You're able to see more or less groups of prisoners that are lined up there, what's known as the selexia. You're able to see the crematoriums. You're able to see the gas chambers. Everything was under his nose. But instead, Roosevelt decided that it wasn't of his best interest to do it. Churchill followed suit. Even though Churchill made a few empty promises, nothing actually ever took place. There was a group of Jews underneath the OU, Young Israel, Ezra's Torah. They all came together, many pictures that came to the White House under the leadership of Silver, of Eliezer Silver, the famous Rav Eliezer Silver, and others, Rav Kook's, one of the relatives of Rav Kook, his name was Rav Hillel Kook, that came all together. They came with an entourage of 200 of the big Orthodox Rabbanim, the Askanim of the Tzibur in America. They came knocking at the door of Congress, of the White House, begging and pleading, showing them pictures, showing them evidence, showing them signs that were mailed to them of what was going on in Nazi Germany underneath the auspices of the Nazis all over Poland. And they went begging to speak and get an audience with the president in order to convince him to do a little bit of movement to be able to save the rest of the Jews from being gassed. They spoke in front of the Congress, and Roosevelt never showed up. He played a deaf ear. He didn't listen. He had nothing to do with it. Excuses at the end of his tongue. This was before Yom Kippur, a few days before Yom Kippur in 1943, when there would still be almost a year and a half, a little bit more than a year and change, for the war to take place, which we all understood how many millions, not hundreds of thousands, millions of people could have been saved had it not been. The number could have not been 6, maybe it would have been 3 or 4, but these numbers are just numbers. But if you think about the amount of casualties, the amount of death, an atrocious amount of vicious terror that went on during that time period, one man with one decision could have made all the difference in the world. This is the person that when he was elected, Roosevelt, all the Jews were in euphoria. They were so excited because he was such a man of freedom. He was such a man that would play a good role for the Jews. And even when he died, because the information I'm telling you was barely known at the time, there were Jews literally crying on the streets out of upsetness for what was done. Not only that, what was also not known at the time is when the gates of America and England were not really open to the Jews, even when they were able to send over Jews or trying to refute them or trying to get them passports to get out of the catastrophe, of the mess, of the havoc, of literally the Gehenna, the hell that was going on in Europe. No doors were open, no gates were willing to accept it. Finally, almost towards the end of the war, right at the end of 1944, literally, I think a few months right before, he officially allowed, didn't even do anything, Roosevelt, but he allowed for something known as the establishment of the War Refugee Board that went around that was able to save a number of Jews, a few thousands of Jews, and that was what was left of what he could have done. But it was a little bit too late. It was a little bit too late to be able to make amends for what the man had done. I have to say, and I want to say this very enunciantly, history repeats itself over and over again. We see the same type of things that happen, especially when we put our trust in the Nevi'im. Kol al tiftechu bebnei Adam, you should have bitachon only in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And here we have the same exact thing that's happening once again. The same exact thing that's happening once again. In tough, literally approximately a half a year ago, came into power a president which we were all in euphoria about, excited. This is the time that's going to be the game changer. Now, I was also very happy. Of course, we understood the consequences would, in the other direction, would have been 100 million times worse. That's obvious. But people went a little bit overboard. Unfortunately, there were even people talking about names such as, and I don't even want to spit it out on the camera, but names of Mashiach ben David, maybe Mashiach ben Yosef. And when it did, it made me utterly nauseous to my stomach. I remember even speaking about it at the time just because it made me fed up. I spoke about it to people who don't watch and who are able to say such things, and to think, to put such imun and trust in a person that is a complete, if you don't mind me say, egotistical, selfish, narcissistic, and only looking for his personal gains. If you pay attention to what happened in the past 6 months, everything was about three people: me, myself, and I. Nobody else was ever in the picture. He said, I'm going to take care of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and he did a fantastic job. What did he do? He invited over Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, to basically tell him, listen to me or else. And you better do everything I say. And when he didn't want to listen and succumb to all the Tanaim conditions that he said, he threw him out head first out the window, even though he himself is officially a foreign leader of quite a large country. He made an absolute mockery and idiot and made him look like an absolute idiot. Said, I don't have any personal gains, even though he happens to be a Jew, about that idea. To me, it was just another sign that what matters here is my name is on the line. My popularity, my fame, my publicity, my eminence, that's what matters to me. Then he moved on to Netanyahu. Now Netanyahu, of course, realizing what kind of person we're dealing with, conceded to everything that Trump requested. Of course, the man of the hour, the man who's going to save us, and people crying with tears in favor of this person who let out approximately 20 hostages, Baruch Hashem, that 20 hostages were released, 20-some hostages were released, and it's a fantastic thing that were saved from the Hamas Gehenna, and we all are extremely happy about it. But of course, it came at the expense of releasing, listen to this, over 7,000 crazy people. Terrorists. If you don't know the stories behind these terrorists, I'm not going to tell you, because you would be absolutely mummified. You wouldn't believe about what type of people these were. Mass murderers, not small murders that killed one or two people, mass murderers, some in the 10s and 20s, who are on the loose right now, and of no personal interest, if I could say, of saying, Al chet shachataru lefanecha. They're not doing any type of tshuva. All these murders were let loose. Why? Because Trump wanted to make sure, Chevre, I'm going to get these guys out. I'm the one in charge. He didn't want to do with any type of force against Hamas, because then he knew he would be criticized and ridiculed. by other people. He went and did it through being very diplomatic, being able to speak nicely. He said, I'm going to take care of them. Look, I got them out. Of course, nobody's looking at the future expense about what it's going to cost Israel, but Beseder, he let it go. And of course, Netanyahu conceded because he had to. If he didn't, he wouldn't have the man behind him, and he realized that he would be in trouble when he wanted to make a future move against Iran. And here we are sitting in Sivan in Tafshin Pei Hey, an incredible maneuver, miraculous, about everything that's going on right now with our attack on Iran. The skies were freed. It's an incredible miracle. Using the Mossad, we spoke about in the previous Sherm. I'm not going to get into it. Everybody knows about what's going on right now in Iran. But listen to me. Every day that goes by, there are lo aleinu v'lo aleinu v'lo aleinu, more casualties, bar minan, that are going on in this country. We're already up to 20 casualties. 20-story buildings are being knocked off. Bat Yam, Petach Tikva, Bnei Brak buildings are being harassed. Yes, they're able to knock off 60, 70, 80, but you can't, it's not hermetically sealed. Bombs are hitting down here. Every day that goes by that they don't finish up these ballistic missiles and their shooters, it causes more damage and more things. All that they need to do is, the shorter the term in order to get rid of the things that shoot these ballistic missiles, then they'd be in good shape. Physically speaking, and I'm only speaking physically, don't worry, in the way we see things with our eyes, if America would get involved, so the amount of time would double and probably even triple, because they have a bunch of planes sitting here doing absolutely nothing, and we're basically relying on our planes in order to be able to take care of their shooters. If he would do that, it would go. But it's not my war. Why do I have to intercede? It has nothing to do with me. I didn't have to do anything. Why should I have to go ahead and fight a war that doesn't belong to me? It's again going back to what I call the Roosevelt syndrome. It's going back to the same thing. He plays a good eye, tries to make himself diplomatically correct, that everybody should look him in the right eye, but what really matters is my personal gains. It's about my narcissistic interests. It's all about my selfish desires. He wants to make sure that he dies with a fantastic name. I caused peace in the Middle East, and it didn't have to come by me lifting a finger. It came by Israel doing my bidding. He's going to take credit for every single thing that was done here. Trust me, it's going to be all because of him. He's not willing to get himself involved because of his own personal interests and not an interest of what has to do to saving literally, I don't want to say a number, chas v'shalom, but many, many people that are under absolute sakana. I have to tell you, don't just look at the amount of people that died, because when we talk about injuries here, we're talking about serious injuries. Lo aleinu, these explosions are completely catastrophic. I don't know if you've heard people who are eyewitness to being in a building that happened. There's absolute trauma that goes through such a person. Therapists are here, and psychiatrists and psychologists all over the place, because they're in absolute fear. Children, I'm talking about my own children, Baruch Hashem, so far, Bli Ayin Hara. Here in Beit Shemesh, we've been pretty safe. We've just, from the sirens and hiding in the mamad rooms, the kids cry. It's unusually a fear situation that's going on here. And it can be stopped. It can be stopped so easily, again, on a physical basis. But the problem is, we're samech, and we put our smichut on a ben adam. We put our smichut on someone that we shouldn't be doing, and when we do that, we get ourselves in absolute trouble. We put ourselves in the wrong place. How often do we say these incredible words, but now's the time to really pay attention. Kol goyim sevavuni b'shem Hashem ki amilam. We always talk about the goyim that are attacking us from all the direction, only to be somech on Hashem. Tov lechasot be'Hashem mimtog minvim. Stop paying attention to people. Be somech on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sabuni gam sabuni b'shem Hashem ki amilam. We talk about the fact that we're always busy focusing on people and other people who can protect us. I have to quote to you an incredible Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. It's in Parshas Va'azinu. If anyone has a Sefer Emes Yaakov, it's kedai to see. He brings a Gemara in Sanhedrin, a famous Gemara in Tzadi Zayin, that basically says, Ein ben David ba, that when does Mashiach come? Achis Yashu Mina Geula, until they give up from the Geula, that the Geula will not happen. Kebiyochol Ein Somech Ve'ozer L'Yisrael. Ke'ilu, there's no one to help us. And he asks the obvious question, what are you talking about? One of the 13 principles of faith that we never give up. Tzipita Yeshua, that we're always focused and waiting for Mashiach to come. How can it be that when we give up from the Geula, that's when the Geula will occur? It doesn't make any sense. Says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, and this was written 50 years ago, and it also applies today, right now. HaKavana Bezeh, that as long as Klal Yisrael are waiting for the Geula to happen through some leader, through some big brother, through some type of derech tiv'i, through some type of natural phenomenon, because you're waiting for one of the nations to have rachmanas on us, and they'll back us up, and they're going to help us out. Vadai loy tovoya Geula, quote from Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. It will not come. Ki chesed leumim chatat. Everything that they do is a chet. It's not true. Snuimem. They don't really care for us. They only care about themselves. Only when we're misyayish legamri, when we give up, we're mityayesh legamri mi ashlayot elu, from these facades, from these fakes, from these ideas that we think are real. V'navin ki ein lanu lishen ela levinu shabashamayim, and when we realize there is nothing else except for Kadosh Baruch Hu, az yavo ben David v'yigalenu gula amitit. So nice of Donald to help us out with this phenomenon, to make sure that we're not going to be somech on anybody else except for chesed u'mim chatad, never to trust him except for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only by Hashem himself. He's the one that is going to be the one that's behind us. But I have to make a contrast, and with this I'm coming to a finish. The leaders of the Goyim, and if I could say, unfortunately, many times in this Medina, are about, they're called leaders, but they only lead themselves, like I just mentioned. It's such a focus on my own publicity, on my own presentation, to be able to get my names in the book, that when he drops dead, that his name will go into the Hall of Fame of the best leaders that happened in history. It comes from such a place of absolute eminence, of their own personal interest. We had the same idea that happened during the Oslo Accords. You had three crazy people there, literally crazy: Clinton, Rabin, and Arafat. Everybody knew, and Clinton to this day, he's still alive for some reason, that he's still going out and saying he was nothing more than a bloodthirsty, money-hungry, rabid liar. Everyone knows the reason for all terrorism that is going on in this country is because of one person, Arafat. He gets it all on his shoulders. And every time they were about to sign the paper, he changes conditions again. They promised weapons to be handed over to the OPL, or we're giving Arabs that are terrorists weapons and grenades. That's what they were going to hand over. They were going to bring over all the Arabs from Jordan and Egypt and all the other places where the Palestinians are located, or relocate. They were going to build, and they promised them a Palestinian state. It gives me my heart thumps every time I even think about the idea. This is in 1993 in August, what was going on. All of these things, and he was still changing conditions on a constant basis. And even after they signed the paper, the conditions were trampled, reneged over and over again. There were terrorist attacks twice as much as there were before the signatures. Before that happened, the great Oslo Accords, until they went ahead and brought it back in 1995 and tried to redo it. But again, Arafat went back and forth until Rabin was killed and assassinated by his own people in order to stop this terror that was happening, that was going on. Now, of course, Jews don't kill Jews, though we never abide to such ideas. But we understand that it was a crazy phenomenon, and it was all done for one reason. One reason. Clinton was about to be impeached. Pay attention. Look into history. We all know that rabid man who was succumbed to Giloy Arai She'ein Kamo, a man who was one of the most horrific presidents that ever walked on this planet, and he just wanted to make sure he didn't get impeached, so he was willing to sell all of Israel to the devil just to make sure that he shouldn't get impeached. It's all about myself. Every president, every leader, that's all they have to focus on. And when we go and open up a piece in Sichot Musar, with this I'm finishing, from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. It's in Maimer Chaf Aleph in year Lamed Gimel. It had to do with Parshat Bahalotcha and Parshat Pinchas, over a year when Moshe Rabbeinu was coming and inaugurating the great Yehoshua. Let's not forget, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted his children to take over, and he's still willing to go ahead and give it over to Yeshua, because the Kodesh Baruch Hu decided that that's the Wait, that's the one who's going to be in charge. What does it say? I wanted an ish asher ruach elokim bo rosh bnei Yisrael ema, in order to make sure that he wanted to make sure to take a person that would be a proper leader. Elokei ruchot. You know what Elokei ruchot means? Someone who's going to go ahead, as Rashi points out there, to know v'sovel kol echad ve'echal sheimtza mishu she'avin daitoi shekol echad ve'echad. You know what that means? He's not thinking about himself. He picked Yeshua because he's going to be a greater man who's going to understand the individual, the needs of the nation, not the needs of myself, not the needs of my own personal desires. One who knows that, as it says over there in Chazal, that every person have their own personal needs, their biases, their interests, and he's going to make sure to try his best. 3 million people is not a small amount of people to be able to figure out what they need. As Rav Schwab writes over there, Asher ein lahem ro'eh. It doesn't say kitzon bli ro'eh. It doesn't say that they are a sheep without a shepherd. It says Asher ein lahem ro'eh. Le'arot, that they don't have a ro'eh. What does that mean? He says Le'arot even if they have a leader, but you need to be lahem, for them as a roy, as a shepherd. You have to go ahead and for them as their individual to understand what's best for them, not what's best for you, not what's best for your personal interests. That's the only way that you can be a proper leader. Milanu Gadol from Yeshua. As we all know, what did Yeshua do? He was the one that was loy mush mitocha oil shel Moshe Rabbeinu. He did shimush of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one, as we all know, he was the one who was willing to go. Macheni na misfarecha. He said, Tov li amoti michayim. He said, it's better for me to die. He'd rather be erased from the whole book. Could you imagine? Moshe Rabbeinu is the book of Chumash, to be able to remember L'Dorei Doros. And Moshe Rabbeinu was willing to sacrifice everything for sacrificing for his nation. These are our leaders. He picked Yeshua. You know why Yeshua? Because he was the one who was Mesader Safsalim before the Shir. Before Moshe Rabbeinu was about to give Shir, Yeshua came beforehand, and you know what he did? He prepared the benches. Who cares about preparing the benches? Because he cared about the individual. He wanted to make sure it's comfortable for them. He wanted to make sure that they knew how to relax and listen to Torah like it should be, comfortably, and listening before the great, great, great Moshe Rabbeinu. He cared about the people. Those are leaders. Those are the ones that we inaugurate. Those are the ones that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that I want you to go ahead and take Ish Asher Ruach Elokim Bo, Asher Ruach Bo. He's the one that has it, Lo Yomish Mitocha Oil. He's the one that followed suit. Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest man of all, was not just great because he was the biggest of Nevi'im, he knew all the Torah. That's not the only reason why. It's because he loved Klal Yisrael, and he cared about the nation because of the nation, not because of himself. Of course, he was the Anov Mikol Adam, didn't think about himself, he thought about everybody else. And he had to inaugurate the person who filled his shoes, and as long as Yeshua was alive, nobody was chotet, things were perfect, because he was still in the shadow of the great Moshe Rabbeinu, for one reason and one reason only. It was all about us. It was all about Klal Yisrael. Those are our manhigim, as Rav Chaim Shmulevitz writes over here. When you have an employee and he's out of place, he's fired. I don't want to see you. I don't have anything to do with you. Take your paycheck and leave. But when you have a child, you never do that. He's always in the house. You always work with him, and you try to work and sue with him. And he says, and that's what it says in Parshat Ba'aloitcha. When Moshe Rabbeinu spoke about the fact that he gave birth, am I the one who gave birth to him? Says the Sforno, and Rav Chaim Shmulevitz expands on it. That what does it mean? What does it mean with this idea? Because when I give birth to him, if I'm the one who gives birth, so I'm responsible. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling him, you're responsible. You're responsible for each one of them. If I don't like them, if I have trouble with them, I have trouble with you, Moshe Rabbeinu. I have trouble with you, even though he didn't make an egel. He wasn't making problem with the Meraglim and Parshat Shlach in this week's Parsha. He wasn't the one doing all these problems, and still he was nazuf. He was still thrown out because of a result of that. You know why? Because Moshe wasn't just a leader, he was one of us. He was part of us. He was one who cared of us as one of us, as the father, just like a father cares for his child. No less and only more. And that's why he inaugurated Yeshua to be the one to take care of the nation that happened afterwards. And Ad Kedei Kach, these are our leaders, and this is the difference between us and them, and it's something to just stop and appreciate. The more I think about it, it comes from such a point of How can people even give any ksat imun? I don't have to read you psukim to say don't trust in goyim and nedivim and bnei adam, and I don't have to talk about it. All we have to talk about are what our real leaders are, and we are begging for Mashiach to come for one and only reason, to be able to see what a real leader is about. Mashiach is all about, yes, it's about us. It's one who cares about us. His focus is about us. He's going to be going on a donkey and not some fancy car with its fancy planes that are flying from here and there, because it's all about Imo Anochi B'tzara, the one that leads us, the one that takes care of us. And B'ezrat Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us a Yeshuas Hashem care. Fine, we don't need anybody around us. We'll take care of it ourselves. And the leading of our Mesiras Nefesh, our Tehillim, our Torah, B'ezrat Hashem, should take us out of this war and bring Shalom Ba'aretz, and the Mashiach should come. B'mirat B'yameinu. Amen.